Welcome to Betrayal Stories. In today's video, we explore a story that lives in the quiet spaces between right and wrong, between familiarity and awakening, between who we think we are and who we become when our hearts begin to speak louder than reason. This is not a story about recklessness. It is a story about restraint, about timing, about the slow, terrifying realization that sometimes the most powerful connections arrive when we least expect them, and ask the most of us in return. I never imagined I would think of him this way. Not once. Not ever. He had always belonged to a different category in my mind. A constant. A background presence. Someone who existed safely outside the boundaries of possibility. Older, calmer, always respectful, always slightly distant. The kind of man whose presence you notice without fully realizing why. But that night changed something. We were standing in the garden, the air cool and heavy with the scent of wet soil and blooming jasmine. Above us, the sky stretched endlessly, scattered with stars that seemed to whisper secrets meant only for those willing to listen. I remember the quiet more than anything, the way silence wrapped around us instead of pushing us apart. He handed me a cup of tea. Our fingers touched. It was barely anything. A moment so small it could have gone unnoticed by anyone else. But my body reacted before my mind could catch up. A spark traveled up my arm, sharp and undeniable, settling somewhere deep beneath my skin. I pulled my hand back too quickly, as if burned, and for a second, neither of us spoke. Something had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough that there was no pretending it hadn't happened. My name is Sarah. I was 28 years old when I moved back into my father's house after the end of a long, exhausting relationship that had drained me more than I realized at the time. The breakup wasn't explosive. It was worse. It was slow, complicated, filled with conversations that went nowhere, promises that never landed. I didn't return home because I failed. I returned because I needed space to breathe again. My father welcomed me without questions or conditions. The moment I stepped into his arms, something in me softened. His house still smelled the same old books, polished wood, faint traces of coffee lingering in the mornings. It was the house where I grew up learning how to be myself before the world. Complained everything. My father had always been social. Even after retirement from the Navy, he kept close ties with old friends. Men he had served with. Men who shared decades of memories, inside jokes, and stories that grew louder with every retelling. They came over often. Most of them were exactly what you'd expect. Boisterous, gray-haired, full of laughter and nostalgia. They spoke loudly, moved comfortably, and treated me like someone's daughter, even though I was long past being one. But one of them was different. His name was Ryan. My father called him Rye, casually, like the nickname had existed forever. Ryan never raised his voice, never dominated conversations. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, people leaned in without realizing they were doing it. He had a presence that didn't demand attention, but somehow received it anyway. Ryan had known me since I was a teenager. Back then, I was just a restless girl with wild curls and endless questions, always passing through rooms without stopping long enough to be noticed. To him, I had always been frozen in that version of myself until I wasn't. Life has a strange way of rearranging people when you aren't paying attention. Ryan ended up staying at our house for a week while his own place underwent renovations. It seemed harmless, logical, temporary at first. It felt completely normal. He slipped into the rhythm of the house effortlessly. Morning coffee, quiet evenings, shared meals that didn't need conversation to feel complete. But somewhere between those ordinary moments, something else began to grow. Late-night conversations on the veranda. Shared silences that felt comfortable instead of awkward. Glances that lasted half a second longer than necessary. Nothing crossed the line. Nothing needed to be explained, and yet everything was changing. One evening, my father went to bed early, tired from the day. Ryan and I stayed outside, an old jazz record playing softly in the background. The music crackled gently, filling the space without overwhelming it. The air felt alive. I sat curled on the wooden swing, thin blanket pulled around my shoulders. Ryan sat nearby, holding a cup of coffee, relaxed in a way that felt intimate without trying to be. "I forget how peaceful your home feels," he said quietly. I smiled, surprised by the honesty in his voice. "It didn't feel peaceful when I was younger. I wanted to escape it." He nodded, as if that made perfect sense. "And now?" he asked. "Now I realize peace isn't really about places," I said after a moment. "It's about moments, about people." The words hung between us, heavier than I intended. His eyes met mine, deeper than before. "Some moments," he said, "feel like they're meant to stay with you." The way he looked at me then wasn't familiar. It wasn't casual, and it definitely wasn't paternal. It was patient, curious, like he was seeing me for the first time from that night on. Our time together stretched longer. He asked about the books I was reading, shared stories from his life, carefully chosen, quietly meaningful. Sometimes we didn't speak at all. We just sat together watching rainfall or listening to the house settle into silence. No promises were made. No lines were crossed, but something fragile was forming between us. Delicate as morning mist, impossible to grasp, yet impossible to ignore. One morning, I found him in the kitchen before sunrise. Struggling with the kettle, he looked almost embarrassed when he noticed me. "I was trying to surprise your dad," he said. "Didn't think you'd be awake." I laughed softly. "He won't wake up for hours. You're safe." We stood side by side, preparing tea. Our arms brushed. Neither of us moved away. "I'm glad you came back home," he said quietly. The words landed deeper than he probably realized. "I'm glad I did too," I replied before I could stop myself. Our eyes met. Understanding passed between, ooze gentle, undeniable and terrifying. That afternoon, I sat reading on the garden bench, sunlight filtering through the leaves above me. Ryan joined me, sitting close enough that our knees touched. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. My heart raced. "Of course. You've grown into someone remarkable," he said. "You carry light with you. People feel it, even if they don't know why." I didn't know how to respond. His vulnerability caught me off guard. "Thank you," I whispered. He leaned closer, not touching, but close enough that his presence filled my senses. "I'm afraid," he admitted. "Of what?" I asked. "Of what this could become. Of how it might look. Of your father." "I'm not a child," I said gently, "and I know what I feel." He looked away, struggling with the weight of it. I didn't ask for this feeling, but now that it's here, I don't know how to ignore it. I reached for his hand. "Then don't." That night we sat together again, closer than before. The silence between us was no longer empty, it was full. The next morning, he packed his bags. "You don't have to leave like this," I said. "I need time," he replied. "To be sure. To do this right." He stepped closer, gently cupping my cheek. "If this is real," he said, "I'll come back not as your father's friend, but as someone who chooses you." Oh, a week later, I found a note tucked inside my book. "I've thought of you every day, not as the girl I once knew, but as the woman who woke something in me I thought had gone quiet forever. I'll come back if you still want me." I pressed the note to my chest. I still wanted him.